Week 3 preview. We start off in Dallas as Lamar Jackson and the 0-2 Baltimore Ravens. They are traveling to Dallas to take on Dak Prescott and the 1-1 Cowboys. It's a 4:25 p.m. kickoff. The Ravens are favored by 1 point. The over-under for this matchup is 49.5. Keynote: the Cowboys have not been underdogs at home in the last 5 years. It's only happened one time, and that was when Tom Brady and the Buccaneers came to Dallas a few years ago. So that was something I thought was very interesting. Cowboys are underdogs at home, and in the last 5 years when Dak has started, they have only been underdogs one time. That's it, just one time. So as I break down this matchup between the Ravens, Cowboys, obviously, let's start off with the big names. Lamar Jackson versus Dak Prescott. Okay, head coach, you have John Harbaugh versus Mike McCarthy, two head coaches who have both won Super Bowls in their respective careers. And let's start off with the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, they are 0-2 on the season. They lost week 1 in Kansas City, opening night of the season, 27-20. And then they lost in week 2, 26-23 at home against the Las Vegas Raiders. But for me, when I look at the Baltimore Ravens as a football team, one of the questions that I have for the Baltimore Ravens is, at what point are the Ravens going to be better at closing football games? You look at the Baltimore Ravens, this is since 2019, since Lamar Jackson's first full season as a starter, this is losses after holding a lead of 7 or more in the fourth quarter. The Ravens have the most blown leads of 7 or more points in the fourth quarter in the NFL. 11. It's been 11 losses where the Ravens have had a lead of 7 or more in the fourth quarter, and they've blown games, which tells me that, okay, if you're blowing leads in games, wouldn't it make sense to go out and get a free agent running back like Derrick Henry? So they go out and get Derrick Henry in free agency, and they go up over the Raiders in the fourth quarter now. They go up over the Raiders 23-13 in the fourth quarter. So I'm thinking in my mind, oh, the Ravens got this. This game is over. Ravens can start preparing for the Cowboys, and they will be 1-1 right there with the Browns and the Steelers in the AFC North. And all of a sudden, the Ravens forgot that they have Derrick Henry on their football team. So this is Derrick Henry, his rushes in the last 10 minutes in week 1 against the Chiefs and in week 2 against the Raiders. And in week 1 against the Chiefs, he had 2 carries for 7 yards. In week 2 against the Raiders, he had 1 carry for 5 yards. And after the Raiders went up 23-13 over, or the Ravens rather, after the Ravens went up 23-13 over the Ravens, the Ravens, they, instead of giving Derrick Henry the football, and on that drive when they went up 23-13, Derrick Henry, I believe, touched the football on 6 of 7 plays and had a great drive. It was a Derrick Henry drive. And he got them in a position to score points, and they went up 23-13 over the Raiders. And Derrick Henry touched the football one time the rest of that game. One time. So for me, I'm wondering, offensive coordinator Todd Monken, Lamar Jackson, John Harbaugh, why the hell did y'all bring in Derrick Henry if you're only going to give him the football 1 or 2 times in the final 10 minutes of games? It makes no sense. It made no sense. And another thing, the Ravens offensively, they are a very, very predictable football team. When Derrick Henry is in the game, they're running the football. When Justice Hill is in the game, they're throwing the football. They have to be more unpredictable and not allow opposing defenses to know what they're doing. So I think they have to give Derrick Henry the football more in the last 10 minutes and in the fourth quarter, period. And they also have to learn how to be more creative and not be so predictable as an offense. And I'm looking at Lamar Jackson. And Lamar Jackson has not been the same since the Ravens lost last year in the AFC Championship game to the Chiefs. Let's look at Lamar Jackson in his first 17 games compared to his last 3 games in which he lost all 3 games. It's the first 3-game losing streak of Lamar Jackson's career against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game last year, against the Chiefs in week 1, and then against the Raiders in week 2. So let's compare Lamar Jackson's numbers in the first 17 games last year compared to his last 3 games, shall we? This is since the start of 2023. Lamar Jackson, his touchdown to turnover ratio in his first 17 games, 33 touchdowns, 13 turnovers. In his last 3 games, 3 touchdowns, 4 turnovers. His passer rating in his first 17 games last year was 103.6. In his last 3 games, it's 82.9. His passing yards per game in his first 17 games last year was 225. In his last 3 games, it's 264. So he's done well in the passing yards department. He's completed 67% of his passes in his first 17 games last year. In his last 3 games, he's only completing 60% of his passes. And in his first 17 games last year, his team averaged 30 points per game. In his last 3 games, they've averaged 18 points per game. So Lamar Jackson, over the last 3 games, his numbers statistically have declined. And I'm wondering what's going to happen with the Ravens moving forward, because you look at the AFC North. Steelers are 2-0, but they still haven't even had a passing touchdown in their first 2 games. So I'm not so sure how long that's going to last. The Cleveland Browns have Deshaun Watson. He's inconsistent at quarterback. And the Bengals are also 0-2. But I'm more worried about the Ravens than I am the Bengals. One, because of their schedule. Next 3 weeks, the Ravens have Cowboys, Bills, Bengals. And not only that, Lamar Jackson, I believe he will start to play better as the year goes along. But I also don't like their offensive line. Their offensive line, they're not an elite offensive line in 2024 like they have been in previous years. And I'm watching a game against the Raiders the other day, and Max Crosby, one of the best defensive players in the NFL, 2 sacks, 4 tackles for a loss. And I'm thinking in my head, hey, Ravens, you may want to block him. This is Max Crosby we talking about here. Max Crosby is one of the best defensive players in the NFL. You may want to block that guy, okay? So I don't like their offensive line. Again, they're predictable as an offense, and they don't give Derrick Henry the football in the fourth quarter for whatever reason. And defensively, this team is not as good this year like they were last year defensively. And obviously on defense, they did lose former defensive coordinator Mike McDonald. He's the new head coach for the Seattle Seahawks. They also lost Jadeveon Clowney, Patrick Queen, Geno Stone as well. And this defense is not as good this year like they were last year. This year, they gave up 25 points or more already in their first 2 games against the Chiefs and against the Raiders. Last year, the Ravens defense, they only gave up 25 or more twice the entire season. They only gave up 25 or more twice the entire season. They've already given up 25 or more twice in the first 2 weeks of the season. Okay? And in their secondary, they didn't have any answers for Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams had his way against that Ravens secondary, especially in the second half, Sunday afternoon in Baltimore. They had no answers for Devontae Adams. I think Devontae Adams finished 9 receptions for 110 receiving yards, 1 touchdown. And they allowed the Raiders to overcome a 10-point deficit in the fourth quarter. And again, I was happy for Antonio Pierce, the head coach for the Raiders, but that was a game that the Ravens blew more than the Raiders won. And so these next 3 weeks for the Ravens are very pivotal games. And ESPN Analytics, they give percentages on teams, whether they're going to win or lose. And I'm looking at the Ravens against the Cowboys. They have a 52% chance to beat the Cowboys. In week 4, they play the Bills in Baltimore. That game will be at home for the Ravens. They have a 47% chance to beat the Bills in Baltimore. And then they travel to Cincinnati to take on Joe Burrow and the Bengals in week 5. They have a 51% chance to win that game. So it's a possibility. The Ravens could start the season 0-5. I can't believe I'm saying that because I had the Ravens winning the AFC North. But they could seriously start the season out 0-5. They got to win 2 out of the next 3 games. They have to. Otherwise, the Ravens' playoff hopes could be in jeopardy. So they have to win 2 out of these next 3 games against the Cowboys, Bills, or Bengals, or their season could be over. Now, I don't think in the AFC, if through the first 5 weeks you 1-4, I don't think you're going to be able to recover from a 1-4 start and make the playoffs. I just don't see it happening. Now, let's go to the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, the Cowboys, they are 1-1 on the season. Week 1, they beat the Browns in Cleveland, 33-17. Week 2, they got manhandled by the Saints, 44-19. And when I look at the Cowboys, obviously, they are led by Dak Prescott. And Dak Prescott, for the season so far, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's thrown for 472 passing yards. He's completed 65% of his passes. But when I look at the Cowboys, I'm not even going into the talk about their offense. I'm going to talk about their defense. And last week, the Saints had a field day against this Cowboys defense. And I said this the other day, and I'm going to say it again. January 14th, the Packers put a beat down on the Cowboys in AT&T Stadium, and the Packers dropped 48 on the Cowboys. The Packers broke the Cowboys, and they have not recovered since. Because I'm looking at this game against the Saints the other day, and it's the 5th 40-point game allowed under Mike McCarthy since 2020. And they gave up 44 to the Saints in week 2. They gave up 48 to the Packers in last year's wild card playoff game. So it's the first time in 56 years that a team in consecutive home games gave up 44 points or more. I'm going to say it again. And the first time in 56 years that a team allowed 44 points or more in consecutive home games. Aaron Jones and Alvin Kamara are still running against that Cowboys defense. They have no answers for opposing teams' running game. And I'm looking at this Saints-Cowboys games last week, and the Cowboys defense, they gave up a touchdown on the first 6 drives of the game for the Saints. And 5 of the 6 drives for the Saints had 69 yards or more on 5 of their first 6 drives against the Cowboys on scoring drives. And let me give you the numbers on these touchdown drives by the Saints against the Cowboys in week 2. 80 yards, 70 yards, 70 yards, 70 yards, 20 yards, and 69-yard touchdown drives against that Cowboys defense. And so I'm looking at this Cowboys defense. Up front, you still got DeMarcus Lawrence. You still got Micah Parsons. You still got Damone Clark at linebacker. You still got Eric Kendricks as well. You got Malik Hooker in your secondary and Trayvon Diggs. But let me be the first to say, when it comes to the Cowboys defense got punked against the Packers and against the Saints. They got flat out punked. And I was hearing Cowboy fans tell me when Dan Quinn decided to take the job in Washington and they hired Mike Zimmer, Cowboy fans told me, we're going to be fine defensively. We're going to be okay. We have Mike Zimmer now as our defensive coordinator. He's just as good as Dan Quinn. And the Cowboys were pathetic against the Saints. And so these Cowboys defensively, they struggle against teams who can run the football at an elite level. The Packers had Aaron Jones last year. The Saints, they have Alvin Kamara. And I'm looking at the Cowboys. 4 of their next 5 opponents are elite teams who can run the football. Ravens, Lions, 49ers, and the Steelers. So Ravens, Steelers, Lions, 49ers, all can run the football. So I was saying the Cowboys were a playoff team, but I had them as my 7th playoff team in the NFC coming into the season. I'm not so sure the Cowboys going to make the playoffs because they can't stop a cold. And they struggle stopping the run. And all 4 of those opponents that I just named, Ravens, Lions, Steelers, 49ers, all have elite running games. And those are the Cowboys' opponents in 4 out of their next 5 games. So they are in trouble. And here's the thing about the offense. They can't run the football whatsoever. So they are extremely one-dimensional. And Dak Prescott, he plays great when the Cowboys are either leading or the game is tied. This is since the beginning of last year. When the Cowboys have a lead or the game is tied, Dak Prescott, 26 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. When they are trailing, Dak Prescott has 12 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, which tells me he's a front runner. Dak Prescott is a front runner. And yes, Dak Prescott can win you football games. Yes, Dak Prescott can at times have elite moments in the regular season. But Dak Prescott, when the Cowboys are trailing, Dak Prescott is not the kind of quarterback that can overcome a 14 or 17-point deficit and win you football games. That's not who Dak Prescott is. Dak Prescott plays well when the Cowboys are winning or the game is tied, when everything is going well. But when the Cowboys are losing, Dak Prescott is not going to overcome any major deficits. And to me, in order to be an elite quarterback, you got to be the kind of quarterback I can rely on to overcome a 10 or 14-point deficit in the playoffs. And not just in the playoffs, in the regular season in general. So they have an elite offense with Dak Prescott in the regular season if they have a lead. But if they don't have a lead, they struggle. And the Cowboys are one of those teams where they either blow opposing teams out or they get blown out. There is no middle ground for the Dallas Cowboys at all. Like, they either blow you out or they get blown out. That's just how it is for the Dallas Cowboys, and their point differential and wins and losses backs that up. But I'm concerned with their defense. And against the Saints, they allowed 190 rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns by the Saints, and the Saints had 15 first downs by running the football. So they got to figure that out. This game is going to be very interesting. Obviously, you got an elite receiver in CeeDee Lamb. And, you know, so far for the season, CeeDee Lamb, 9 receptions, 151 receiving yards, 1 touchdown. He's an elite receiver. But outside of CeeDee Lamb, who else on this Cowboys offense is an elite playmaker? But they are at home, and they do score points in Jerry World. So I believe that this game is going to be a close game. It's going to be a high-scoring affair. But I believe that the Ravens are the more desperate football team, considering they are 0-2. And after week 3, they have to go against Josh Allen and the Bills at home in week 4. And then they got an AFC North matchup against Joe Burrow and the Bengals in week 5. So that being said, I'm rolling with Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens to beat Dak Prescott and the Cowboys. I'm going Ravens 31, Cowboys 24.